Nicknamed the Cyclone. At Hasher, at a young age, he took up motorcycle riding. He was racing all over and had this quite the big reputation of being a good motorcycle rider.
Motorcycles are dangerous.
It wasn't long before Eddie joined board track racing, and he joined the prestigious Indian team, Wigwam Racing Team. This was a prestigious team sponsored as a factory rider for the Indian motorcycle. At the ripe young age of 19, Eddie became a board track racer, racing those fast motorcycles all over, and he was a star. He was a superstar.
What's it like?
Like an explosion between your legs.
Eddie was entrusted with a big base 8-valve 1000cc production bike by Indian, and he ripped. He was one of the fastest men alive in that time. Hasher and teammate Ray Seymour, they dominated the track scene. They set new records wherever they raced. They eclipsed what was known as the Excelsior, one of the fastest motorcycles of the time. And Hasher and Seymour, they completely dominated the racing scene at that time. But do remember, the flame that burns twice as bright burns half as long. Despite probably having a very promising career, those close to him, his parents, his wife, and others, they wanted him to quit racing motorcycles. And he did for a time. He worked at the Harley Davidson motorcycle shop, and he was selling. Davison was his friend. He was the original owner of Harley Davidson, but he couldn't stop. He had to get back on that racetrack, that board track, and keep racing. Why? Because Eddie was a talent. Fast Eddie was one of the fastest men alive. However, Eddie knew he was playing a dangerous game, told his loved ones that he was going to call it a day at the end of the season. He even turned down a trip to Cuba to race because he was going to quit racing altogether. On the morning of September 8th, 1912, Eddie's father received a letter. And Eddie said that he was going to quit racing, that this was going to be his last race. He was just going to hang it up. He had enough for racing. He wanted to join his father working in the construction business. Sadly, those were plans that were never going to be fulfilled. That same day, Eddie took the track at the Wellsbourne Motor Speedway in New Jersey. Little beknownst, it was going to be his last ride. After the main event was done, Hasher and Seymour, they took part in a 5-mile race with a lot of younger riders that weren't as good. Hasher and Seymour were handicapped 1 lap, and they were going to go ahead and see who was the winner after 5 miles during that race. Teammate Seymour, he had the record on that particular race. However, it was Hasher holding a slim lead after 2 laps. They were hauling about over 90 miles an hour. And then suddenly something had happened to Hasher's bike. It was a horrendous crash as Hasher was winning that race. He was going to win that race and win that money. And he looked down and he saw that there was something wrong with his motorcycle. He was trying to fix it. Maybe the choke, the carburetor, who knows what it was. And when he was fixing it, the bike just suddenly veered off to the right and went straight into this crash wall. And it slid about 100 feet and it killed like 3 kids. And one kid, it got decapitated. He got his head cut off because all the kids were looking through the fence, watching the races, not thinking that this bike was going to come at him. And Hasher's bike just flew up really high and it flew over the crash wall. He flew over the crash wall too, and he died instantly. And there was actually 4 kids, ages 15 to like 12. They died. Like I say, one got his head cut off. And then what happened was Hasher's bike, it came back onto the track, and the last place rider was racing full speed. He didn't see that there was an accident because he was focused on the track. And Hasher's bike came down and hit this guy on the head, and it killed him instantly. So there was 2 motorcycle riders, Hasha and this other rider, and then there was 4 children who died during that accident. So the total of 6 people. That was one of the most horrendous motorcycle deaths in history. And it was just a horrible scene. It was just a terrible incident that will never be forgotten. Eddie Hasha's body was totally mangled beyond belief, and his motorcycle was totally wiped out. What was to be one of his last races before joining his dad's construction business turned out to be his nightmare, horror experience, as 5 other people passed away, 4 children, another rider, Albright, and himself. It was just a horrible incident, one that never should have happened. The Grim Reaper once again visits the Motor Dome. They called it the Murder Dome because of the violent situations that happened, all the innocent riders who passed away. And that was one of the last races that they had on the board tracks. You start closing all the tracks. They deemed it too dangerous because the Grim Reaper was walking around. It was just a horrible situation and one that should never have happened. Albert Shrimp Burns, he died in an incident about a decade later on one of the racetracks. He had an accident with one of the riders and he passed away. Shrimp Burns was one of the top riders of his day. Hasha, who collided with Burns, he died just a few years later on a racetrack also. Their protection wasn't good. They just had that helmet, they had goggles, they wore a sweater, they had pants. They just didn't protect them from all those speeds. And those board tracks start tearing apart. They start rotting because of the oil dripping on the track. They tried to fix it, but it was no use at all. It was just a mess. They ended up destroying all the board tracks. By the 20s, the late 20s, there was no more board tracks. It was completely obsolete. Those board tracks that killed Eddie and Shrimp and all those other racers, mini racers through the years, they had to stop those tracks. Why? Because they were called murder dromes. And they were just killing so many of these riders. It just was insane what was happening on those tracks. And it was just sad. You know, Eddie, he left a wife, his parents. He left too early. He's supposed to be joining his papa doing the construction. And then something happened and it was horrible. And that was the end of his life. At just a young age, you know, the flame burns bright and then it burns out. Today we honor the memory of Eddie Hasha, who passed away so tragically in 1912 at the age of just 21. He had so much more to offer in life. And we remember the memory of a great writer in Eddie Hasha. Rest in peace.